Okay, welcome to the Robin Room. Do 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 do. This room is kind of small. It's certainly a lot smaller than I would like, so it might be a little bit hard to show this video in a way that kind of does some of these things justice, so we'll see what we can do. Alright, starting with my language section here. Ooh. What you see on the top shelf is spelling, and I put those kind of on the top because the cards are really tall, and so it seems like it makes more sense to have them there, especially when you're trying to browse through them. But that second shelf is the easy words that you match with a picture, and then they get harder. Then there's compound words, and then that final tray to the right is some pretty intense words that focus on specific sounds like T, CH, or something like that. So that's obviously for more skilled readers. The middle shelf here with the red, orange, and green binder, those are spelling and types of word activities. So the red and orange binder are spelling stuff, and then there's dictionaries there for students who are stuck on certain spelling things or writing activities or whatever. And then there's story cubes for writing. That organizer box right there is full of logic puzzles, word searches, Mad Libs, and maybe some handwriting things. So those are just all assorted worksheets related to word study or grammar or what have you. I found that to be pretty helpful for kids who want to kind of browse through what kind of worksheet activities we have and want to look at them. That bottom shelf is stamps for stamping out letters, and then there's the movable alphabet in those large boxes, and then lastly those are some of the portfolios that the kids have for some of the work that they're doing. Moving around here, since this is part of writing and spelling stuff, I have the metal insets along with our material shelves right here. So they have pencils and erasers and scissors and paper and glue and stapler, all that kind of stuff, and seems like that's working out pretty well. They moved that hole punch from its original location over to there because they I think got the organization almost better than I did. This back shelf back here, where you see the grammar boxes, that should be our grammar section, but it's mostly empty right now. We need to build up more on that grammar section. But the grammar to me is kind of tied into more of that writing stuff, so there's writing worksheets there where you start studying types of writing. And then that writing is also tied into literature. So these three things are kind of all together to me and the way that they use these materials. So here you have an assortment of books that we've kind of been visiting throughout the class, and that red binder right there that says poem is for people who are currently studying different types of poems and they want to recreate their own kinds of poems. So kind of gives them an overview of some of those things. And then there's also reading response papers there for people who are starting to learn about components of literature. This section is also kind of expanded by having these books to choose from right here, but these are not just any old books. These are also science books, mostly about birds, bugs, mammals, aquatic life, space, elements, minerals, all kinds of stuff, you name it, but they're mostly science books right here. So it's reading, but science. And so this right here is kind of like a keystone to other elements of our classroom. Like over here you see the geography shelf, which is kind of related to some of this stuff because you might be studying biomes, So then you would want to reference some of the geography right here, or so a lot of the science also has to do with great lesson stuff. So this wall right here is reserved for the great lessons. And right now it looks very bare, because what I like to do in my classroom is every unit that we do pertaining to the great lessons, I make this big back wall, kind of like the conversational piece that looms behind us so that we can kind of continually reference it. So where we left off last year in the Great Lessons was talking about the coming of humans, and we talked about Australopithecus and Homo habilis and Ergaster and Heidelberg and all that kind of stuff, and we kind of like left off on that timeline of humans with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. So where we're picking up this year is the coming of writing. And so I made this green string that goes all the way across the classroom, kind of ends there. And this is our timeline picking off at 30,000 BC. And I picked 30,000 BC because that's probably about like the approximate time where we sort of transform from being cave dwellers and hunter-gatherers to actually creating societies. So the students all got together and measured out. Each foot equals 1,000 years, so all of these 1,000 years are spaced out here, and then it ends out at 2000 BC, or at 2000 AD, so current time basically. And we read the Epic of Gilgamesh. So what I explained to them was that the Epic of Gilgamesh was the oldest story ever written, and after reading it, we decided that we were going to try to figure out when it was written. So if you see these little brown cards hanging up somewhere on the timeline, is some of the guesses that they made. So they would have to come over here to the shelf and take a little brown card and then draw something from their favorite part. So here you have somebody who did the wild man in Kaidu, and these people decided to do that flower of immortality. That was a very popular part in the book, and him crossing the river of death, or the ocean of death. And so they all took their guess on when it was written, but then they were totally astounded to find out that Gilgamesh was actually written way over here, somewhere around 2700 BC. So I find the timelines to be really a great way of giving a visual representation of things transforming throughout time and stuff. And so now what they're kind of faced with is trying to figure out, why did it take them so long to create the first story, the first written story ever. And so this was a really great discussion topic for them. And before this moment, the shelf was kind of empty. So I asked them, like, why do you think it took so long to write something? And they were like, well, they probably didn't have a piece of paper or a pencil. And so I kind of pulled them a little bit more, and they started realizing, like, oh wait, yeah, no, you could write things with like other stuff too, right? Like you could write in the sand or whatever. So then that's when I kind of revealed to them that Gilgamesh was written on these tablets, written in clay, and it was hardened. So our new material here that I have out are different globs of clay. You take out the tray, and hopefully this isn't too hard to see. But yeah, they have a cuneiform alphabet, and then they roll out their clay, and then they write their words inside that clay, and they practice writing Akkadian cuneiform, just like the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I find that to be very exciting, and they seem to enjoy it a lot. And then we have this book out here, which talks about how our alphabet transformed. And as we get into this a little bit more, and talk about human societies and writing and all this kind of stuff, this shelf is going to start filling up more and more with different activities that kind of have to do with that. So I have a Braille thing to put out on the shelf, and they can practice feeling Braille, and there's a code making thing, and we'll talk about hieroglyphs and all that kind of stuff. But one of our next projects that we're going to do is we're going to start figuring out like where some of these civilizations started in the world, and we're going to revisit the flood story in Gilgamesh, and we're going to use that to kind of relate to climate change and geographic shifts throughout time, and how our world has transformed over time and how that has affected humans. So we have a lot of stuff ahead of ourselves, and I'm really looking forward to this section becoming more and more interactive as we go along. And this shelf being part of that sciencey thing, these bones were left over from projects that we were doing last year in terms of zoology, and the kids still really like manipulating them and writing about them and making observations about them. So I like having kind of reminders of different science projects and stuff that we have going on here on some of those shelves. So that is why this shelf is here, because if we continue talking about sciencey stuff, we might talk about minerals or different biological aspects of stuff, or earth science and stuff like that, or animals or whatever. So these reference books are here available to us in coordination with like language study, but also our great lesson studies in science and history and all that kind of stuff. So those all blend together. And then again, being part of our language aspect right here, we have our Spanish shelf, and the Spanish materials are all mostly materials that I have made myself. The top shelf are just some books that we might have read together, or books that I think that are kind of easy for them to figure out on their own. So for example, Dr. Seuss's One Fish, Two Fish is now in Spanish, and it's obviously a very familiar book, so it's easy for them to read and relate to. However, El Chupacabras is a book that I read to them, and we discussed it in class, and so it's available for them to revisit as something that they can kind of explore on their own. Within the shelf, on the top, those are basically like basic noun word studies. So we have a game that was donated to us called Loteria, and it's basically like memory, but it just has just assortment of random Spanish nouns. But on the right, there's a basket with some yellow cards in there, and then that organizer shelf with some papers and cups on it and stuff. Those all go together. So what you start doing is studying the noun. They're just assorted classroom nouns, so things that you're very likely to encounter within the classroom, like la puerta or el lápiz, la cinta, stuff like that. So once you're familiar with those, then you can move on to some of those worksheets that are in that organizer, or like the bingo game that's in the organizer, as other forms of studying that. So it becomes more complex. And then the same for that middle shelf is a book, De Arriba a Abajo, and that's about body parts. So that's kind of related to this whole middle shelf unit, which then again has just the basic matching flashcards of body parts, and then there's worksheets to go with it, and then there's a body part game that once you become really familiar with it, you can start using that game. And then the bottom shelf is more conversational, where here you have like ¿Cómo estás? is prompting them to start having conversations, and so they kind of select different cards that have responses where they can talk about how they feel. And this green tray right here is giving commands on putting on or taking off outdoor clothes. So ponte tu abrigo, or ponte tu gorro, or quítate tu gorro, are things that they're going to learn when they start like being able to put together phrases in Spanish, but also adding to their noun vocabulary. So that's why those are on the bottom shelf. And of course we have our Spanish calendar, which is one of the jobs to change the dates. Moving on, geography shelf, globes, maps, yay. This right here is our piece shelf. The piece shelf, when I first came here to the school, was actually very bare and superficial, I would say. Like, not, it didn't really give them an in-depth perspective on what piece was supposed to be. And I will admit that the organization of this piece shelf isn't super well thought out. It's something that I keep on adding to throughout the school year and stuff. So I think that as I come up with more materials to incorporate in there, I think that eventually there'll be more of a consistent message. But aspects of the piece shelf are largely, you know, your own self-awareness kind of stuff. So that's what you see on the top there. You see the pom-poms in the jar for the zones of regulation. We talk about being aware of how you are feeling within the classroom. And then that's, you know, we have a kindness jar for people who hear people saying kind things, and a picture of Dr. Maria Montessori as our peaceful leader. And then there's like a Zen thing over there too, where you take these little crystals and you put them in a Zen circle. And same with some of these things down here on this shelf. Like there's a basket with a little bird and a bell, so you walk really, really slowly and try not to have it make sound. There's a glitter jar, so for anybody who doesn't know what that is, when you're feeling dysregulated, you shake the glitter jar and you stare at it and try to zone out and peace out. And you know, it's supposed to be helpful for people. And you watch the glitter settle. Then there's some suggestion cards that the students made about like what you can do. Like say some of these things on the piece shelf doesn't appeal to you for whatever reason, then you take one of those cards that somebody has suggested, like read something or eat something or draw something or whatever. And it was pretty cute. They came up with some pretty creative ideas. Then you know, you have like the pictures of people here in this basket. Those are like emotional conversational cards. So like getting people to start creating those social stories and being aware of their emotions. This middle shelf here is when you start really getting involved in like actual piece work and starting thinking about like not just yourself but other people too. And so there's like the purple cards are different games where it basically sets up a social story, and depending on which way you go through the setup, it gives you different versions or different social outcomes of the same story. So you can start like making choices and seeing how those different choices changed, and it prompts them to start asking questions or like having conversations about like, well, why do you think that person got so upset? Or why do you think it was resolved so quickly? Or what do you think they're going to do in the future? So they found those to be really fun. And then there's like other worksheets that ask them to think critically about like phrases maybe that they might sound like they're being good, but then when they really start thinking about it, they're like, actually, no, that isn't kind or peaceful. And then the bottom shelf has some books that we've read involving peace or manners. That was kind of like a unit that we started our year off. So Piggy book in particular, and What Do You Say, Dear, are like big ones that we talked about with manners. And then there's a weighted ball and some headphones for students who need some more peace. But yeah, and other ways too, like peace has become a big part of our curriculum, and we're trying to figure out like talking about mindfulness. We're talking about different ways to kind of show people that you're listening, different ways to deal with conflicts and all that kind of stuff. And My goal is to have them start thinking about their inner selves, then their relationships with other people, and then they start thinking about like the environment around them and the world as a whole. So we're doing some projects later on that will do that, and as we carry through it, this piece shelf will probably change. Here's our circle area and our whiteboard, which is mostly in Spanish. Here's our math materials. So over here is our geometry section. And again, I don't know if this is organized in the best way possible. I kind of changed versions of it because I know that you're supposed to have like top to bottom and left to right in terms of increasing difficulty, but oftentimes I kind of feel challenged by the shelf sizes themselves and certain things that need to be on those shelves. So, maybe I could swap the plains solids cabinet someplace else, but maybe it's fine where it is. I don't know. And like having time in there, does it belong? I don't know, but there isn't really any other place to put it, so I have time down there in that bottom left-hand corner, and it seems to work for our classroom, so I guess it is what it is sometimes, especially in this limited space, and with math being such a huge material. But I also have some books down there too, because I think that it's really important to appeal to different ways of learning and understanding and talking about math. I think that it's kind of frustrating that there's a lot of math that gets overlooked because it just is math, and there aren't many stories that go with it, which I think is very silly. So any math stories I like to kind of tuck in with the math materials. This one is our prized shelf in terms of organization, but still not perfect. So you have the number cards up there, small bead frame up there, and large bead frame because of space, size. It's not going to fit anywhere else on the shelf, but that's the closest organizationally that's supposed to be. And then same with that snake game right there. Then we have bead boxes, bank game, stamp game. Then the shelf below that, introduction to multiplication and learning your multiplication facts. Then you have the racks and tubes, and that is there because of space. So again, not the most ideal spot, but that is where it fits, that's where it goes. I can't do anything about it. So then below that, there's multiplication facts flashcards. So once you kind of like get the concept by using the multiplication board activity set, then maybe you'd move on to doing like kind of memorizing your facts through using flashcards. And of course you have the checkerboard, and the stuff down on that bottom right hand corner is kind of like assorted materials, and then also like those binders are word problems, so those are definitely more challenging math things. And then this filing cabinet actually is full of math worksheets and stuff, and unfortunately also on that bottom shelf is our spelling packets. So in the future I'd like to get another filing cabinet where I can move all of the spelling packet stuff out of there and have something over here where I can just have like language related worksheets all in just one organized filing cabinet, rather than there being that one weird thing over here. But there's so many spelling packets that they just have to fit in there. So you do what you gotta do. Bead cabinet, ooh. Fractions. That material on the top I know is not Montessori, but it is cool as heck, and I would highly recommend it. They are very drawn to it in terms of fractions. They cannot stop touching it. Yep, good look at our board in Spanish. Check. Lunch and all that kind of stuff. That is probably it. We do have an art room in here. This is kind of our space and kind of not our space at the same time. So, you know, we have a separate art teacher that comes in and does art with the students, but since there's such proximity to our classroom, they often use this as a workspace, especially like it being smaller and more quiet. So they're kind of in here doing that stuff. So, yep. That is it for our relatively small classroom. And I guess one last thing that I should say is that I feel as though the materials in this classroom are kind of lacking. Like, I wish that I had a lot more materials, but we had a change in teachers. So I'm the new teacher, and I think that the teacher that left may have taken a lot of materials with her. And so I'm trying to build back a lot of the stuff and also trying to figure out what's what. So until I learn more about different types of materials and what's available to me, it's probably going to look like this for a little bit longer, but I already feel like I know more from taking this course and being familiar with Montessori stuff. So that's it.